All right, kids, hope you're doing well. So I start off with this question. Do you guys recognize this right here? This picture. Um, this guy standing in front of a bunch of tanks. What is going on here? All right, well, some of you may have seen this picture before because it's hanging in my classroom. It's a big poster, and it's probably the most famous image. It's maybe the most famous image of modern history. Okay, so today we get into China and the events that eventually led to this image here. One of the really interesting parts about this, we don't really know who this guy is today. We have no idea who he is. We have no idea if he's dead or alive. We have no idea if he ever went to jail. Okay? All right, but before we get into that, today we want to get into China after Mao. And as you guys know, Mao was a very brutal leader, perhaps killed more people, probably killed more people than anyone else in the history of the world. Okay, and towards the end of his reign, Mao did kind of normalize. He did, his policies got a little bit more normal. He was no longer completely committed to the ideas of communism. Now, he never apologized for that. He never apologized for the millions of people he killed, but there definitely was a part of him that kind of began to understand that perhaps going all in on communism and totally adhering to the ideas of Karl Marx were perhaps not the best or easiest way to rule. And that kind of begins the way China changes in the 1970s. And to this day, China's kind of taken that type of route. So China lightens up a little after Mao, okay? All right, so after Mao is done, the next leader is this guy by the name of Deng Xiaoping, okay? Deng Xiaoping decides to kind of give up on the communist economy in small doses. Okay, he basically said establishes trade with the U.S. and other countries, and Mao, by the way, kind of started this. Um, but that's not communist. Okay, communist countries do not trade with American corporations, and that basically begins here. And so we're going away from communism. He also decided that communal farms, for some reason, he decided that tens of millions of people dying was probably not the best way to do things. I'm being sarcastic, of course. And so he gives up on that and they give land to the individual farmers. They also allowed some free trade zones within China. Okay, so this was not, these changes were notable, but they weren't, sweeping. The average Chinese person didn't feel completely different uh, through this, but it kind of sows the seeds for huge changes in China. Okay, all right, now, uh, civil rights, or I should say human rights, also changed a little bit under Deng. Okay, he did release some people that were in prison during the Cultural Revolution. Okay, so prisoners that had been in there for a long time were released. Not all of them, by the way, but a lot were. Okay, but it's important to note China doesn't become a democracy under Deng. Okay, it doesn't totally change and become democratic, and still today it's not democratic. It has a really bad human rights record even today. Okay, um, they do have sort of like elections, but communists get to decide who runs for office, okay? All right, and the media is strictly censored. In fact, the picture that I showed you, which is perhaps the most famous picture in world history, that picture you can't see in China if you did a Google search. You couldn't see it, they censor it, okay? Now, I'm talking about the 19, and so China still has a really bad human rights record, okay? All right, now, Deng rules till 1983, and as I said before, they've kind of continued down this path of more rational policies, more, they've gone away from the command economy, but they haven't gone through a real democratic change. That then brings us to 1989, a year in which a lot of communist countries fell, and a lot of people thought that China was going to have this communist fall. They had protests at Tiananmen Square, a really famous landmark for Chinese communism, kind of like the Washington Monument or Lincoln Memorial is over in Washington, D.C. At first, the protesters' demands were democracy, and at first the government listened, and there was huge masses of people and an incredible amount of hope that these people had. And so, as the protests grew, people genuinely thought that things would change. Unfortunately, they didn't. And so today, what I want you guys to do is you're going to watch the video from Frontline about Tiananmen Square, and the agenda has the link that I want you to listen to, and then you'll get into the background on the actual photographer who took this. He's going to explain kind of what happened. It's a very interesting story when he took this picture, and then people will talk about where is this guy? Is he still alive? Okay. There are a set of movie questions that I have linked to the agenda as well, so I want you to answer those. A fascinating story that has captured really people's imagination. Also, some good understanding of just what China did during the Tiananmen Square massacre and how totalitarian countries sometimes behave. Okay, so go ahead and watch the video and do the questions.